So, let me first go over all that I'm going to cover in this video. So, at first, I'll cover the ideas of objectivity and his understanding of all that few features into human decision, the ideas of ideal type, and historical comparative analysis, specifically his notions of historical specificity. Then I'll get to social action, the way he understands it, and then how he also understands the actor, and very importantly his method of interpretation, because interpretation is not just an idea but a very specific, it finds a very specific formulation in Max Weber's works. um, then his ideas on human motive and how one should look at them when trying to study something systematically, the types of social action and what they connote based on his ideas of rationality and means and ends. Um, then we get to the bit about how there is a difference between ideological instruction and value neutral instruction, and not just instruction but analysis, which can also obviously show up in one's research. Basically, the kind of argument that one is making, and how value neutrality in that sense is actually not the same as objectivity. So I think this is very interesting and relevant about uh, what when politicians claim that they're that they're speaking the truth. What does that mean? So I think that's interesting. And then he also talks about to what extent can scientific thinking, in the way that we've understood it, sociological scientific thinking, understand culture. So okay, let me get started, I guess. So, so what he says is that objectivity, in the way that it works in natural sciences, where one assumes an object which is materialistic and predictable, it's a material object, um, as the focus of analysis, one can come up with with through the method of experimentation and other forms of logical arguments, one can come up with certain connections between one stages of a material process and one stage of a material process and another stage of a material process. But that's actually not true when one is studying the human being or society, and he says that we have to study both the human being and the society, and we have to look at different kinds of stakes when we try to study human beings, including self-interest, habit, belief in authority, and the decision making process, like how does one's interest, like one's self-interest, which implies that there isn't a sense of working for the community but for the individual, the individual position that one occupies, and habit, which assumes that there's altogether something different from interest, which makes us uh, do that action. Belief in authority, where there is a sense of force. So all of these actually constantly feature into how one makes a particular decision, and um, so this is so the, so all of these stakes make the human being as a subject of analysis very different from this material blob in a scientific process that one can 100% say acts a certain way or doesn't act a certain way. Then he moves on to the idea of the ideal type, and it's very interesting because he formulates the ideal type as a purely logical tool, not as this isn't he isn't an advocate of idealism when he talks about the ideal type, and I'll actually get to this later because it ties into a bigger argument that he's making about sociology. So He also emphasizes the role of historical development and comparative analysis when studying society. So yes, when studying society, it's very important to see how individuals act, and then to sort of try to work backwards to what are the institutions of society, and always try to understand that there is a subjective perception of the world which is existing very meaningfully with whatever one can say is uh, objective, or rather the idea of intersubjectivity, that we can only reach a uh, greatest common factor of experience, rather than like one way, like 100% predictable way in which society functions. So yes, the human being is very important, and the likelihood of subjective experience there. What's also very important is historical development and comparative analysis, and these are macro concepts, because here we look at society as a direct objective analysis, and think of the course that the past of this that this society's past has taken, and then try to compare it with the course that other societies, individual histories, their own pasts have taken, and then try to come to generalizations about similar phenomena that have occurred. So, if there are certain parts of the world that were a part of, you know, very great empires that spanned a huge territorial space, or were a part of a similar empire, then we can say that there is similarity between these two societies. And again, the what we consider as the unit of analysis in society as a whole also keeps changing, because like if you think of it as a nation, then boundaries can be argued to be arbitrary, etc. But the idea is that when we look at when we exit the human experience and try to look at society as a unit in itself, then we have to look at different societies and try to compare the pasts of these different societies, the histories of these different societies, and it's only then that we can think about the causes of particular processes, social processes occurring in the present. And some of these are very, very specific causes, because they don't fall into any kind of similarity between different societies, and then they have to be looked at very specifically, because they're supposedly specific to a particular unit that we consider society. So social action is basically action that an individual performs because of their expectations of the behavior of other people and institutions. So when you pick up your phone and you say hello, then it's because you expect that you think that people expect you to say hello, and that another person will say hello. So there is a certain expectation of uh, an exchange that has to take place to establish short-term solidarity, and that's an institution. Or with particular agents who occupy a human being space, based on their own history of behavior and action towards our subjective analysis, that person, this person is going to alter their action. So that's also based on expectations of particular people. It's not the same thing as saying hello, because one can say that hello, like an institution would exist if individuals cease to exist, but individuals also shape their actions based on particular individuals around them, and of course all of it is overlapping with institutions of society, norms, and different collective expectations that people have uh, about the way that society and people function. So there are, in order to understand human motivation, one has to look at various factors. That there are economic factors that can shape one's motivation, or historical factors. There are various kinds of parameters that exist, but they all synthesize in a very particular way. So there are tendencies, and one has to look at those tendencies, but also one has to look at how those tendencies actually combine, and that can be very different from individual to individual. So while this individual is an instrument of these tendencies, in the particular synthesis, in the decisions that they make, they're also an agent. So therefore the individual has to look at both as an agent and an instrument. So Weber's understanding of sociology as a science, because it's not 100% certainty oriented understanding, but it is that we have to look at the causes of social action, and how do they then determine the course of this action and the consequences of this action. So it's actually not all human action that Weber's concerned with. Weber's saying that people act based on the way they expect other people to act, based on the way they understand society, and we have to examine their understanding of society and their behavior based on that, and that is actually the subject of sociology. So so that's very interesting. And and of course it's also true that we can't, the way we look at that information also has to be, um, it's not, it's only because two people are a part of the same environment doesn't mean that they have the same information about the way society functions. It's actually really subjective the way they also understand that information, and we have to also look at that information from that perspective, while at the same time looking at why that information is being perceived this way. So this is actually very interesting, because what he says is that the difference between a meaningful action and a non-meaningful action is the degree of awareness. So, so social action is meaningfully oriented towards other people, and non-meaningful action is just that there is a complete awareness. So there is a complete lack of awareness. So there isn't a conscious mental process through which an individual decides that they're going to act a particular way because they expect other people to act in that way, but rather that they simply react to their environment. So there is a lack of a conscious process, and this becomes also very interesting when we look at rationality and how Weber says that rational action functions, and then he goes on to say that the way we understand what is non-rational has to be based on the way we understand rational. So yeah, actually that's where we are now. So then Weber says that rationality and empathy are basically two instruments that the sociologist uses, that the researcher can use to reconstruct subjective meaning. So when we look at the social action that an individual is doing, then we have to reconstruct their own subjectivity, right? We have to enter their shoes. We have to enter their space and put on their shoes, and see how what is the awareness with which uh, information is falling into a particular scheme for this person, and then analyze their action, why they acted the way they acted, based on rationality and empathy. So let's look at that. So in the process of interpretation, where we where a bridge forms between the researcher and the subjective universe of the human subject, and that is interpretation, we have to look at means and ends. So what does he mean? Weber mean by that? So what he says is that if based on common experiences, and again this is building on intersubjectivity, but in this bridge between the researcher and the subject of analysis, we have to start somewhere, right? And the researcher has to escape their own subjective world to enter somebody else's uh, subjectivity, and therefore the your raw data is intersubjectivity, common experiences, your understanding of how other experiences also exist. So so we have to look at this intersubjectivity, and then we see what is the greatest probability that if a certain outcome had to be achieved, an individual would act a certain way. And so, therefore, we create an analytical ordering of actions based on the outcome that we identify. That if there was a certain awareness about, and we assume awareness, if there was awareness about achieving a particular end, then um, what would be the most um, what would be a way to go about it in which it would be the most possible to achieve that outcome. So now, of course, this is an analytical ordering. So my understanding of how this action would be achieved might not be um, as efficient as somebody else's understanding, which is why this someone else who has actually come up with a more efficient way of achieving the action in question has a more rational, like their rationality is their rational observation is superior to my rational observation, my rational understanding. But the point is that when we construct this this chain of events that we can call rational, which is not the same thing as calling it analytical, because I can have a particular argument about the most rational means, and somebody else can actually come and defeat that and say that there is a more efficient way of achieving this particular outcome. But we move from there, and this is the ideal type, that how an individual should have acted based on rationality. So so if an external but we observe that, and in this that and this is mostly the case, that this individual did not act perfectly rationally. So, therefore, we then look at the tendencies that existed, and using intersubjectivity, using common sense and this sense of how people can act, and still on the spectrum of probability, we try to reconstruct other possibilities that could have taken place, and that we also understand whether it was this person giving into certain temptations, or them not being able to arrive at the most rational means of of achieving something because of their lack of information, various things. And we think of these other tendencies, giving into these other tendencies um, as effects and errors. So we actually have to start using empathy now to start to understand what why did this person not use the most rational means of acting, and how have are there other people who have done this similarly, what are the notions that exist about them, and is there a particular, like, okay, sure, this was not the most efficient way of achieving an outcome, but in their own scheme of things, like even if there was a lot of dead weight and there were extra things that were going on in their own scheme, could they achieve this particular could they achieve the action that they set out to achieve or not, like did it make sense for that to happen? So for that, empathy then becomes this analytical tool. So rationality is the reference point, and empathy is is deviating from this reference point to understand social action. So social action can actually be perfectly rational, and it can deviate a lot from the most rational means of understanding the causes of social action and the course and consequences of social action. And the more and more we deviate, the less rational it is, and we have to use empathy. We have to enter the domain of intersubjectivity to look at common experience and see that uh, and to see how people have acted such that their own such that this person's way of acting makes sense to us, and that is interpretive understanding. So again, he says that it's not as if ends are always rational, because a lot of the talk so far has been about means, that if there is a particular outcome that has to be achieved, then how do you achieve it? And if this person didn't go about the most rational way of achieving it, we use empathy to understand how this person and why they achieved what they achieved. So it's not as if we can simply assume that the outcome then is rational. It's just that as a method of sociological analysis, we understand that this outcome was what this person set out to achieve, and then they came up with the means of achieving this outcome. But ends are actually, there can be a great degree of awareness about the ends that one is that one has, or simply emotion that like there isn't a justification for the end that one is pursuing, but one is just pursuing an end because because it's important to this person. So as far as Weber's understanding of human motive is concerned, he says that there are various opposing tendencies that define the circumstances that one finds themselves in, and within that, of course, there is the most rational way of then like looking at these circumstances and trying to achieve the outcome. But these tendencies are often opposing in nature. So, for example, uh, something like wanting to pursue a PhD, but at the same time, like during the process of the PhD, you might not end up earning too much, and you might not be able to um, get other material pursuits. So, so you also are seduced by these material, not just seduced, like they give you happiness, so you also want to pursue them. But as far as like, for example, the uh, goal of attaining status is concerned, you would actually choose to not. You would rationally choose to not consume these material pleasures because you can attain that goal. Now, that goal itself is questionable, and according to Weber, status is an important goal for human behavior. But within these circumstances, then one has to understand human motivation, and human motivation has to be understood on in two ways. One is whether in this person in the when you are interpreting this person's organization of the world, this person's ideology, then it has to be subjectively adequate. So if this person is if someone is choosing to um, instead of take an online course for instead of taking an online tutorial course for a particular for scoring well in their paper, they actually decide to study a whole different set of books that most people would not, and which has in the past not with the greatest probability resulted in the in them be in people being able to get the most amount of marks on their test, and this person also wants to get the most amount of marks on their test, but the reason that they are using those books is because one particular person in their vicinity used those books and actually ended up getting a really good score on that test, and this was very impressive for the person in question. So it's subjectively making sense to them, and at the same time, it is also it's subjectively adequate. At the same time, it also has to be causally adequate, which doesn't mean that it has to be the most rational, but that it has to in some capacity make sense. So even if it is not the greatest uh, possibility with which this person can achieve the goal, there's still some possibility with which this person can, like, there is an analytical ordering which makes sense, a step by step process which can lead to this person achieving the particular goal. For example, getting a really good score on a test. So so now, let's discuss the four kinds of actions, four kinds of social action. There's instrumentally rational action, in which ends are supposedly rationally considered and therefore arrived at, which is characterized by a high degree of awareness. And the means that one employs to get to those ends are also rationally constructed. They're based on the greatest probability that exists in society for achieving those ends. So that's instrumentally rational action, and all of this is social action, of course. So it is based on action which is oriented towards society. So the goal in question, the means employed, all of these are social categories. Essentially, one has to build on uh, intersubjective um, um, data. One can call it data, but information, intersubjective information to arrive at what is the what is like the most probable, and even statistically speaking, in that sense, like statistics assumes multiple points, so in many ways it is inherently talking about intersubjectivity. Then there is value rational action, where an individual is pursuing a goal not because like their end is not being pursued because it is the most rational, where there is a very high degree of awareness about why they're pursuing what they're pursuing, but because there's a particular value which is more emotional in nature, and that is why this end is what it is. But given that but the means that one uses to get to these ends is based on what has worked the most for people. So it is um, value rational. Then you have affective action, which is action that's um, it's not pursuing rational thought, and it's only because you experience a particular feeling and you um, act that way. So an act of kindness, for example, of course it could also be instrumentally rational. An act of kindness, it could be value rational, kindness as a value, or it could simply be that in a moment you're overwhelmed with a particular feeling and that's why you act kindly, in which it is affective action. Lastly, there's tradition, which is simply that there is habit. So this is actually the least characterized by any kind of awareness, because you're simply acting mechanically. So if you wake up at a particular time in the day, or you drink 5 glasses of water because you always drank 5 glasses of water and not because it's good for the body or any of it, then that's habitual action. It's tradition, and and I mean that I think one can have a whole different conversation about whether it should be called tradition, but that's how he defines it. So, so then what he says is that, and this is where he starts now talking about ideology and value neutrality and objectivity. So, objectivity is not that one side has a particular understanding of means and ends, has a particular value, another side has another value. So you come to this midpoint between them, and a sort of statistical balance. You strike the statistical balance, and you say that, okay, I will I 50% of what the A is saying is right and 50% of what B is saying is right, and so this combination of 50-50 is objective. That's not objective. Objectivity is that you consider that given a certain end, what would be the analytically the most efficient way of arriving at those ends based on intersubjective common experience, past experience. So social sciences do not concern themselves with the nature of ends. Sure, one can talk about whether an end was considered, and like whether the pursuit of an end was characterized by a high degree of awareness or not. Was it meaningful? Was it rational? What one can't say is that an end in and of itself is good or bad. So, for example, on questions of death, or salvation, or the in some sort of an inherent meaning to human life, like metaphysical meaning, cosmology, etc. It's not the job of social sciences to look at the intrinsic value of ends. Social sciences have to orient themselves towards what is the most rational way of arriving at a particular end, and how have people acted given that rationality as a reference point. So sociology is not saying that people act rationally, but it considers events that happen socially rationally, and rationally in the sense that it is using both the using both the instruments of rationality and empathy that are sort of codependent when it comes to analysis. So in that sense, when we use empathy as an analytical tool, then we are looking at the deviation from rationality, but there is still a sense of arriving at an outcome using a particular set of means, and therefore it is subjectively rational. So in that sense, even empathy is simply a way of arriving at what is subjectively rational. So, for example, when a politician says that they are speaking the truth, that there is a certain amount of objectivity to what they're saying, that's not uh, that's not true, because it's a position that someone is taking on a controversial issue. So what they can, and this is more of a matter of a way of talking, but it's an important difference, and especially now when there's so much doubt about who is lying, and especially because politicians seem to be lying a lot. So of course most of them aren't even value neutral, but there's a difference between having an ideological bias which makes you say something which is that you, because of your own values, believe in something, and that is why you want to pursue it, and value neutrality, where you don't want to where you say that it's not because of my ideology that I'm saying this, but because it is what is happening, like, so basically that what I'm saying is not guided by my ideology is what value neutrality is. So value neutrality can only be defined as opposition to an ideological leaning. However, that is not to say that this person is objective, because they have not, only because they're value neutral means that they're free of bias, but that does not mean that they have considered uh, all of what has happened and assimilated it into an analytical ordering which makes the most amount of sense, which is what objectivity would be, that you consider everything rationally and you put it into an analytical order which is the most likely to have occurred. So it might be that your intentions are good, that when you communicate with people, you declare that you're being value neutral, and then you're actually like not speaking based on your ideology, but that's not the same as you being objective about what is happening. That doesn't necessarily make you an authority on truth. So it's interesting because then he goes on to talk about how a lot of cultural phenomena that take place are based on constraints and scarcity in society, like very particular events of a society, and that's how they must be considered. Like these are interconnections um, between institutions that are based on a number of parameters and not actual connections between things, that only because sociology has studied uh, lots of outcomes that people socially want to pursue, people want to pursue in terms of how they want to act in society, that they can now enter any context and come up with what are the connections between things. No, a lot of this is just given in a particular society. So So then, what sociology can actually do is that with this level of given and without commenting on ends, one can look at what is given in a very particular way, and then develop analytical laws that, or an analytical ordering of how to achieve a particular cultural end without commenting on that cultural end. And this is only about what is scientific analysis. Weber's not saying that people should not pursue better values or that they should not try to create a better society, but simply that a lot of these interconnections have to be based on the particular case, and that's what scientific analysis is about. So, so yeah, I guess that's about it. Hope you